The disciple who was told to do it. Every Christian tradition that has ever existed agrees on one thing about Judas Iscariot: he betrayed Jesus. He took 30 pieces of silver from the chief priests. He led the soldiers to the Garden of Gethsemane. He identified Jesus with a kiss. He handed the man he had followed for 3 years to the people who would execute him. The story is in Matthew. It is in Mark. It is in Luke. It is in John. It is the most consistent narrative across the 4 canonical Gospels, and for 2,000 years, it has carried a specific moral weight in Western Christian culture. Judas is the betrayer, the traitor, the figure whose name became a synonym for treachery in every European language. Descended from Latin. In Italian, Juda is a traitor. In French, un Judas is a peephole, a spy hole, a small opening through which you watch without being seen. The name became an architectural feature, a physical object, because the association between the man and the act of covert observation became that embedded in European culture. Dante placed Judas in the 9th circle of hell, the lowest point of the entire inferno, in the mouth of Satan himself, being eternally chewed. That is the received tradition. In 2006, the National Geographic Society published the first English translation of a text that had been physically recovered, authenticated, and painstakingly restored over a period of decades. The text was the Gospel of Judas, and in it, Jesus asks Judas to hand him over, not as a betrayal, as a commission, as the act of a disciple doing what his teacher required of him to fulfill a purpose the other disciples could not understand. The text that changes everything about the betrayal story had been sitting in a safe deposit box in a bank on Long Island, New York, for 16 years before it was translated. If this kind of investigation is what you have been searching for, the archive runs considerably deeper. There is much more here for those willing to follow it. The Gospel of Judas did not arrive in the scholarly world through an archaeological excavation. It arrived through the antiquities market, through a sequence of transactions, mishandlings, and near destructions that constitute one of the most remarkable stories in the history of ancient manuscript recovery. And the portrait it preserves of Judas Iscariot is the direct opposite of the one that put his name in every European language as a synonym for treachery. How the text survived and nearly did not. The Gospel of Judas is part of a larger codex known as the Codex Tchacos. The codex was discovered in Egypt in the 1970s, in a cave in the region of El Minya in Middle Egypt. The precise circumstances of its discovery are not documented in academic records because it was found and initially handled by antiquities dealers rather than archaeologists. The codex passed through multiple hands in the Egyptian and European antiquities markets throughout the 1970s and 1982. It was offered to several scholars and institutions during this period. Professor Stephen Emmel, a Coptic specialist who examined it in Geneva in 1983, recognized it as a significant early Christian text, but was unable to secure its acquisition for a scholarly institution at the asking price. The codex was then purchased by a Greek antiquities dealer named Nicodemus Sarandes, and stored in a safety deposit box at the First National Bank of Geneva. When Sarandes died, it passed to his family and eventually to another dealer who transported it to the United States, where it was stored in a safe deposit box in Hicksville, New York, on Long Island. During the years it sat in that safe deposit box, the codex deteriorated severely. The papyrus, which requires stable humidity and temperature conditions to remain intact, was exposed to conditions that caused it to become extremely fragile, crumbling into fragments when handled. By the time the Maecenas Foundation for Ancient Art in Switzerland acquired the codex in 2000 and began the process of scholarly authentication and restoration, the text was in a condition that required years of painstaking conservation work before it could be fully read and translated. The restoration was led by Florence Darbre of the Martin Bodmer Foundation in Switzerland. The authentication and translation were led by Rodolphe Kasser, Professor Emeritus of Coptic Studies at the University of Geneva, working with a team of scholars that included Gregor Wurst of the University of Augsburg and Marvin Meyer of Chapman University. Their work established that the codex dates to approximately 300 AD, and that its content reflects a tradition dating to the 2nd century. But this is not the strangest part of what the recovery process revealed. What do you think it means that the text that changes everything about the betrayal story spent 16 years deteriorating in a bank's safe deposit box on Long Island before anyone with the scholarly resources to read it had access to it? Leave that in the comments. This community was built for exactly that conversation. Irenaeus of Lyon, writing in approximately 180 AD in his work Against Heresies, mentioned a Gospel of Judas by name. He described it as a text produced by a group he identified as Cainites, who held that Judas had done something praiseworthy in handing Jesus over. Irenaeus cited it as an example of heretical excess. The text Irenaeus condemned in 180 AD is the text that was sitting in a bank in New York 16 centuries later. What the text actually says: the Gospel of Judas opens with a statement of its nature and purpose. The secret account of the revelation that Jesus spoke in conversation with Judas Iscariot during a week 3 days before he celebrated Passover. Secret, the same word used in the Gospel of Thomas to describe its hidden sayings. The tradition of reserved, esoteric teaching runs through several of the Gnostic texts and reflects a specific understanding of the spiritual life, in which deeper truths are accessible only to those prepared to receive them. The text describes a series of conversations between Jesus and Judas that occur separately from the other disciples. In these conversations, Jesus reveals teachings about the true nature of the divine, the origin of the material world, and the destiny of the human soul that he does not share with the 12. The theological framework is distinctly Gnostic. The creator of the material world is not the ultimate divine reality. The material world is a prison from which the divine spark within each human being seeks to escape. The role of Jesus in this framework is to demonstrate the path of liberation, the return of the divine spark to its source. The crucial passage in the Gospel of Judas is the commission Jesus gives to Judas directly: you will be cursed by the other generations, and you will come to rule over them. In the last days, they will curse your ascent to the holy generation. And then the central statement: but you will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me. You will sacrifice the man that clothes me. The physical body of Jesus is described as a garment. The divine reality within it needs to be released. Judas is the one who will accomplish that release by handing Jesus over. He is not a traitor acting from greed or disillusionment. He is the disciple whose understanding of Jesus's true nature is the deepest of all, and whose willingness to act on that understanding makes him the most trusted rather than the most despicable figure in the story. If this investigation is surfacing things that your standard education never reached, it means the work is doing what it was built to do. That clarity is what keeps this archive alive. The text then records Jesus's instruction directly: but you will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me. Already your horn has been raised, your wrath has been kindled, your star has passed by, and your heart has become strong. The star that has passed by is significant in the Gnostic cosmological framework. Each person in this tradition has a star associated with their divine spark. The star of Judas is identified by Jesus as the star that guides his own path. It is an identification of Judas with Jesus at the level of divine origin. What Irenaeus knew and why he called it heresy. Irenaeus of Lyon knew this text in approximately 180 AD. He knew it well enough to describe its central claim, that Judas had done something praiseworthy, and to identify the community that used it. His condemnation of the text as heretical was not based on the claim that it was fabricated or of recent composition. It was based on the claim that its theology was incompatible with what Irenaeus understood as the correct interpretation of the Christian faith. Understanding why the theology of the Gospel of Judas was incompatible with Irenaeus's framework requires understanding what that framework was built on. Irenaeus was the primary architect of the argument that authentic Christianity is defined by apostolic succession, the transmission of correct teaching through a line of bishops stretching back to the apostles. In his framework, the authority of any teaching is established by its institutional pedigree, its ability to trace itself back through recognized bishops to the apostles themselves. The Gospel of Judas presents a Jesus who transmits his deepest teachings, not to the 12 who became the institutional foundation of the church, but to Judas, who is excluded from that foundation. The most trusted disciple in the Gospel of Judas is the one who is absent from the institutional structure that Irenaeus was defending. That absence is not incidental, it is structural. If the deepest teachings of Jesus were transmitted to Judas rather than to Peter or the 12, then the institutional lineage that Irenaeus was building his argument on does not have access to those teachings. The authority of the episcopal succession is undermined at its foundation by a text that places the most trusted disciple outside the line of transmission entirely. Bart Ehrman of the University of North Carolina, whose published academic work on the Gospel of Judas is held in university collections internationally, has documented this structural incompatibility in detail. Ehrman argues that the Gospel of Judas represents one of the most direct challenges to Proto-Orthodox Christianity's claim to institutional authority because it locates the deepest knowledge not in the 12 who became the Church's foundation, but in the one figure the tradition had defined as the ultimate traitor. The condemnation of the Gospel of Judas as heretical was not arbitrary, it was institutionally necessary, what the scholarly debate has established since 2006. The 2006 publication of the Gospel of Judas generated immediate and sustained scholarly debate about the precise meaning of several key passages. April Decanic, professor of biblical studies at Rice University, whose work on the Gospel of Judas is held in university collections internationally, published a significant challenge to the initial translation in 2007. Her analysis argued that several passages in the original National Geographic translation had been rendered in ways that made the text more positive in its portrait of Judas than the Coptic original supports. Decanic's central challenge focused on the word translated as spirit in the phrase, holy generation. She argued that the term in context refers to a demonic generation, rather than a holy one, which would change the meaning of Jesus's commission to Judas from an elevation to a condemnation. The scholarly debate between the initial translation team and Decanic's critique has not been fully resolved. The ambiguities in the Coptic text are real, and the condition of the manuscript, severely damaged from its years of improper storage, means that some passages cannot be read with complete certainty. What both sides of the scholarly debate agree on is the fundamental strangeness of the text relative to the canonical tradition. Whether Judas is being elevated or condemned in the Gospel of Judas, he is being addressed by Jesus in a manner that has no parallel in the canonical Gospels. He is receiving private instruction. He is being given a specific role. He is not the incidental traitor of the canonical narrative, but a figure of theological significance whose action is framed within a cosmic purpose. The received tradition of Judas as the archetypal traitor, the figure whose name became embedded in every European language as a synonym for betrayal, rests entirely on the canonical accounts. The non-canonical account, recovered from a cave in Egypt, authenticated by specialists in Coptic studies at the University of Geneva, published by the National Geographic Society in 2006, and debated in peer-reviewed scholarly literature since that date, describes a different relationship between Jesus and the disciple who handed him over. The difference between those two accounts is not a minor textual variant. It is the difference between the most despised figure in Western religious culture and the most trusted disciple in a suppressed tradition. What changes when the commission becomes the betrayal? The canonical story of Judas functions as a moral warning, greed, disillusionment, the terrible consequences of turning against what is true and good for 30 pieces of silver, the irreversibility of betrayal, the despair that followed, the returning of the silver, the suicide in the potter's field. That story has shaped Western moral imagination for 2,000 years. It has produced some of the most powerful art, literature, and theological reflection in the history of Western culture. The question the Gospel of Judas raises is not whether that story is powerful. The question is whether the figure at the center of it was doing what he was told. If the Gospel of Judas preserves a tradition, even a partial or theologically filtered tradition, in which Judas understood himself to be acting at Jesus's instruction rather than against his will, then the moral architecture of the received story shifts in ways that are difficult to fully absorb. The most despised figure in Western religious history may have been carrying out a commission. The act that has defined treachery for 2,000 years may have been understood by its actor as obedience. The 30 pieces of silver, the kiss in the garden, the soldiers in the night may have been the visible surface of an arrangement that only Jesus and Judas knew about and that the other disciples could not understand because they did not have access to the teaching that made it intelligible. Whether that reading is historically accurate is a key question that the scholarly debate has not resolved and may never resolve. The manuscript is damaged. The tradition is fragmentary. The theological framework it operates within is one that the canonical tradition suppressed rather than engaged. What is not in question is that the reading exists, that it was known in the 2nd century, that Irenaeus considered it dangerous enough to name and condemn, that it survived in a cave in Egypt until the 1970s, that it deteriorated in a bank in New York until the year 2000, that it was restored, authenticated, and published in 2006, and that the name it gives to the figure who handed Jesus over is not traitor, it is the one who will sacrifice the man that clothes me. If this investigation has opened something you want to carry further, share it below. If this kind of work deserves to continue, you know what to do. And the question worth debating in the comments: if the Gospel of Judas preserves a tradition in which Judas was acting at Jesus's instruction rather than against him, does that change how you understand the betrayal? And does it change how you understand the figure whose name every European language turned into a word for treachery?